I know there's been a lot of interest around the meeting between President Xi, President Putin in Moscow today, so we'll get at that. I just wanted to stop by and be available to you for that. Before I do want to quickly speak to the joint statement between the PRC and Russia that they put out today on deepening their cooperation, including on Ukraine. On Ukraine, I would note that the two sides just said, quote, "The purposes and principles of the UN Charter must be observed, and international law must be respected." Well, we agree. Following the UN Charter would mean that Russia should withdraw from all the territory inside Ukraine, the territory of another member state of the UN, a member that it has invaded. The UN Charter enshrines the principles of respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries, including Ukraine. Now, they also said, quote, the parties call for the cessation of all steps that contribute to escalation of tension and the prolongation of hostilities. We agree. One way to stop the hostilities is to pull Russian troops out of Ukraine, but short of that, Mr. Putin could stop bombing hospitals. He could stop bombing schools. He could stop launching Iranian drones into civilian infrastructure. He could stop the forcible deportation of young kids, thousands of them, putting them in filtration camps inside other places inside Ukraine, but also inside Russia. And he could stop reducing cities like Bakhmut to bricks, to piles of bricks. That is a way to stop the prolongation of hostilities. So now if China wants to play a constructive role here in this conflict, then they ought to press Russia to pull its troops out of Ukraine and Ukrainian sovereign territory. They should urge President Putin to cease bombing cities, hospitals, and schools, to stop the war crimes and the atrocities, and end the war today. It could happen right now. Now with that, I'll take some questions.
The statement also says the Russian side speaks positively of China's objective and impartial position on the Ukraine issue. Do you see China as having an impartial position on this?
No, we don't.
How do you interpret this statement?
Well, certainly I'm not going to do a book review on their statement. They can do that. They can speak to their words. But I don't think you can reasonably look at China as impartial in any way. They haven't condemned this this invasion. They haven't stopped buying Russian oil and Russian energy. President Xi saw fit to fly all the way to Moscow, hasn't talked once to President Zelensky, hasn't visited Ukraine, hasn't bothered to avail himself of the Ukrainian objective, and he and his regime keeps parroting the Russian propaganda that this is somehow a war of the West on Russia, that it's some sort of existential threat to Mr. Putin. That's just a bunch of malarkey. Ukraine posed no threat to anybody, let alone Russia. So no, it can't be seen that Russia's impartial. Now look, if he's willing to talk to President Zelensky and willing to get the other side, and we, you know, if any future potential negotiation can incorporate Ukrainian views and perspectives and can be achieved and pursued with Ukraine, as President Biden has said, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. If that's the direction, then that's something that that could be seen as impartial. But I just don't think right now that they can be seen that way.
And lastly, are we watching a budding alliance between China and Russia here?
I think you've seen over years now these two countries growing close together. Peter asked a question similar to that yesterday. I wouldn't go so far to call it an alliance. Yesterday I called it a marriage of convenience, because that's what I think it is. In President Putin and Russia, President Xi sees a counterweight to American influence and NATO influence, certainly on the continent and elsewhere around the world. In President Xi, President Putin sees a potential backer here. This is a man who doesn't have a whole lot of friends on the international stage. They can count him on one hand mostly. And he really needs and wants President Xi's support for what he's trying to do, because he's blowing through inventory. He's blowing through manpower. His military is getting embarrassed constantly. They've lost greater than 50% of the territory that they took in the first few months of this war. He needs help from President Xi, and that's what this visit was all about. Now, whether it results in anything, we'll see.
Go ahead, Angela. John, two questions for you. Yeah. Is the U.S. aware if there has now been an official request from Putin to Xi for lethal aid to the in Ukraine?
I can only go by what we've seen them say today, which obviously was not part of their, at least part of the readout and part of the statements they put out today. I would tell you what I said yesterday remains true. We don't think that China's taken it off the table, but they haven't moved in that direction. We've seen no indication that they're about to or fixing to provide lethal weapons.
And my second question, the president considers Vladimir Putin to be a war criminal. I'm just wondering what it means to President Biden that Putin calls Xi Jinping a friend.
I don't think we're overly exercised about that comment. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, MJ, where they were talking about a relationship without limits, right? Partnership without limits. So we're not going to get all hot and bothered about the use of friends. What we've seen is these are two countries that are growing closer together, that see in each other useful purposes for pushing back, as I said yesterday, for chafing and bristling at a rules-based order around the world. They want to change the rules of that game. In fact, they would love nothing better, both countries, to see the rest of the world play by their rules rather than the ones that are enshrined in the UN Charter and what everybody else is following. So that's what's going on here.